Well, welcome everyone to the Morning Update Show. I'm your host, Trae Holiday, and we have a great show for you today because we have some great guests up, and I know that we have a list of questions that have come in from the viewers, so we want to get right into it. I got to throw it over to my guy, Big O. Happy Wednesday, man. How are you?
Man, it's Wednesday already, huh?
I know, middle of the week, man.
It's hump day, man.
Right. It's going by fast.
No, I'm doing all right. You know what I'm saying? People can always tell when I slept good.
Yeah.
I watch the comments and be like, man, I must have got some rest. You know what I'm saying? But, you know, I mean, everybody's like my new look. But I got to explain, you know, I was out working earlier. There was a rally at City Hall. So, you know what I'm saying? I popped down there earlier, so I didn't have a chance to pop into the phone booth today and put on the suit and tie. But we have some very important guests. You know, all of our guests are important, and we got members of the Seattle Police Officers Guild that are in the building. And like you said, we got a lot of questions, you know, a lot of questions, which is good. You know what I'm saying? And this is why we provide the platform. So, like, we can put the questions to the officers and to the guild. You know, like, communication has to start somewhere. And, you know, the Converge platform, I think, is a good platform and a trusted platform for conversation to occur. Absolutely.
As we were just talking about, even just before the show, you know, really people have been wanting that honest voice on the streets. And we know that media is just, it seems like it's increasingly polarizing, right? And so a lot of people are finding, well, man, you know, if I don't necessarily agree with one of these perspectives, I'm not feeling like I'm getting the real news. And so it's great that Converge is stepping up, man. You know, citizen journalists in the building.
I tell people all the time, it's like, at this point in this technology age, you know, when I was a kid, and especially when my mom was growing up, you had ABC, NBC, CBS, and the big papers. You know, you only had that real news and some local stuff. Right now, if you're an ignorant consumer of media, it's on you. It's your fault, like 100%. There's so much media that's out there, and if people only decide to consume one voice or one perspective, and I mean, that's on them.
It absolutely is. And I think that one of the things that's great about this platform in particular is giving the stage to both sides. You know what I'm saying? Really wanting to hear from everybody in this field. I mean, we don't want to be assuming anything, and you really give that stage to people to voice where they're coming from.
Well, the thing is, the reason why we've really stuck with this story is because it's the Emerald City that hangs in the balance. You know, and you know, that's why we're still here. We're still in this story. I know for people who watched on the streams, it was very interesting to see, you know, people like me eat tear gas and pepper spray, and I'll talk to them about that. But, you know, and a lot of people thought that once the barricade left, then, you know, Converge would move on to something else. But this story isn't over until it's over, you know, and this is just another chapter that we're in right here. And, you know, with the future of our city hanging in the balance, it's just important that we stick with the story. And because we're at such important time in our city, it is important that, man, we're talking to as many voices as possible.
Absolutely. Again, you know, creating that balance right now is going to be really important. And like you said, the Emerald City hangs in the balance. Ultimately, we have to follow that momentum that was created right here in the CHOP. We have to follow that to some real solutions. And that's what the people are demanding. That's what the people were out in the streets for. Clearly, there's still people out in the streets, you know, so it has not ended in that regard. And I think that we're right to stay on this story in terms of following it till we see some solutions, man. So I'm with you on that.
All right. So here's how it's going to work today is we're actually going to do two segments. So the first segment, it'll be me and Mike and Lexi from the Spog. Well, everybody hears from the Spog. And then the second segment, and those questions are really like, you know, policy questions that people have. In the second segment, then we'll have Officer Roselle, Officer Monique, talking more about on the community things as well. So we're gonna before I take this break, can you come in tight? You know what I'm saying? Okay, so big shout out to Andrew Will Winery. And these guys are over in Vashon, and they sent us some wine yesterday, and it's crazy. I've had to keep it with me. I can't leave this kind of stuff on set because these guys will take this and it will disappear. Thank you so much. I appreciate your viewership and your support of what we're doing here at ConvergeMedia. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we have Mike and we have Lexi from the Seattle Police Officers Guild. You are watching the Morning Update Show. right, welcome back to the Morning Update Show. My name is Omari Salisbury, and right now I'm joined by Michael Solon, president of the Spog, Seattle Police Officers Guild, and Lexi Harris, who's an officer in the West Precinct. That's over in my neighborhood. Welcome to the Morning Update Show.
Thank you, Omari. Pleasure to be here as always.
All right. Now, Michael, I know especially you've been making a lot of rounds on the media, man. Local media, national media, international media. So thank you for taking the time for Converge. You know, we're just little itty-bitty players out here compared to these big platforms you've been on.
You bet, man. Well, you know, I reached out to you a number of weeks ago. We're trying to set this up. Obviously, some political things and some safety concerns for us relative to what happened around this area, and just due to our demand. But I think that your platform really resonates, as we had a conversation earlier before we started, right? That I think that this is what our community needs, especially maybe just society in general, is more platforms like you do that really get to the heart of these topics with truth and just authenticity. So that's why we're here.
Fantastic. So why don't you take a few minutes and tell us, man, what is Spog? What is it all about? Your membership, your objectives, things like that.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'm recently elected. This is month 5. We talk about what a way to start with this whirlwind of, we've had a couple of officer-involved shootings since I started. We've had the pandemic, obviously, that's still impacting us. And then obviously with the George Floyd protests. But Spog in general, we've been around since 1952. And it's a union. It's a labor union that we advocate for the Seattle police officers that do the professional job of policing in this great community, where we focus on hours, wages, and benefits for our people. It's what it is. It's a labor union. And I think historically we've done a really remarkable job as far as advocating for our people. And I think this platform that we have has the ability to circumvent some of the political winds, to really talk to platforms like this, to really advocate for us outside of hours, wages, and benefits. Does that make sense? Because I think historically law enforcement has done a really poor job of getting our information out there with context and truth and ownership when we make mistakes. And I think that's why we're here, is we're going to answer questions, because that's what's been missing, is our side of it, but understanding that we serve at the will of the community. But at the same time, we have to protect the officers that need those some certain legal protections in order for them to be able to do that job, that difficult job of policing.
All right, fantastic. And Alexi, but before I go into a lot of the Spog stuff here, wanted to give you an opportunity to maybe share with the public. You know, you said that you're in the West Precinct. Maybe you could share how long you've been on the force, and you know what some of your thoughts are, and especially in this protest season and things like that.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you. I've been on the front line since day one, since that first Friday, and I saw you kind of behind some of the protesters asking questions that I thought were very good questions. I didn't think you were getting great answers at that time, but you were asking some tough questions, and I thought that was really cool. And I saw you throughout. You kind of bookended it for me from that first day to out here when we left the East Precinct. I don't know who it was on the line, the guy with dreads, but I was back there going, yeah, enjoying what he was having to say. But so I want to thank you for providing that platform. But yes, I'm an officer in the West Precinct. I currently work on bikes. I've been officer for about 4 years. I grew up in Seattle and decided after a career in other things that I wanted to serve the city of Seattle, so I joined.
Okay, real quick, because you said you work in bikes. There's a question that we get, and especially the bikes with the yellow mask, and I'm not sure what the whole story is behind that. But what are the colored bandanas that the bikes run?
So it's nothing in particular. I think it was just that squad cohesion. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there's no real significance.
Okay, because you see yellow, then there's a blue, it's just like a crew.
So we have different bike teams. Okay. Mine is, I work on the night bike teams in West Precinct, but there's 4 other ones that work during the day, and then there's an East bike team, a North bike team. So I think some of them just decided to have different colors on.
All right. Okay, so Mike, over to you. And this is a big question. And I know some of these things at Spog, you might be able to answer some of these things, not, but definitely let us know. Who gave the order to abandon the East Precinct? It does not appear that Mayor Durkin or Chief Best, and if so, are Chief Best and Mayor Durkin firing any SPD officers for giving the order? Also, are you aware that closing the precinct was against the city charter?
So who gave the order it's going to fall on the chain of command. And the chain of command starts at the mayor of the city, who's the executive officer for the entire city, law and order. But then you have the chief of police, and we follow orders from that chain of command. So the decision to abandon it falls in that category, where we don't really have a say when it comes to that order. We have to just follow the order. And as far as city charter, well, I think that's why they pushed so hard to get the East Precinct back. But it definitely was a political decision. And if you look at some of the narrative coming from the city council, they falsely accused us as being the agitators on those nights for the Battle of the East Precinct. And that's why I've called on the city to release the closed-circuit television camera footage from the East Precinct, which would capture those unfortunate criminal engagements when some of the criminal agitators hijacked the peaceful protest message right outside of our door, and particularly at night, that would capture the level of criminal activity which started the violence. Right.
And I'll say that, you know, it's funny. I got a lot of messages. They're like, man, you know, you gotta hammer these guys for all the times that, you know, I was out there. I got tear gassed. I got pepper sprayed. I got hit with a few rubber bullets. Then there was something else that Sunday night. But the whole point as well is that, you know, I'm a journalist, and I'm a member of the media, and I put myself intentionally in danger. And so in a professional capacity, and, you know, every day I come back to I'm just one of those reset people anyway. You know what I'm saying? I reset. There's nothing that's going to kill my vibe. And so, you know, I get gassed one night, come back the next day, talk to the police and do interviews. But I just wanted to let the general public know that it's like, man, you know, I'm a professional person, and I knew the risk of being there on the front line and everything else, and it's part of just my nature as well. So I'm not carrying a personal grudge in here. I mean, man, you know, this is just what we witnessed. But I am happy I had a gas mask the last few days. So let me ask you this then. It says, here's a good question for you. What percentage of the officers actually live in the city of Seattle? And it said, should we have a COLI stipend for those that actually live here? Should we have more community policing by those that live in the community?
That's a good question. I honestly don't know what the percentage is. I know that I do. I've lived here all my life, not all my life, but all of my professional life for over 20 years now. But there are a good amount of people that are members of Spog that actually live in the city and actually have buy-in here. As far as community engagement, well, we've started that well over 4 months ago when I first took office. I hope, you know, your viewership and your listenership goes to our website, seattlepoliceofficers.org, or checks us out on social media where we're putting that information out there. One in particular program that we started is called the Emerald Protection Plan. That came from officers like Lexi or Roselle and Monique that are coming up here in just a few minutes, that direct to community engagement from the line officers that work the street on a daily basis. And part of the Emerald Protection Plan was phase 1, where we worked directly with community members and independent grocers across the city to collect and then donate food. And in 6 weeks' time, we donated over 5 tons of food. And that was phase 1. Phase 2 is what we're rolling out now, is our solution. Not a solution, that's too strong of a term. Our plan, part of the EPP, is to reimagine policing, because we serve at the will of the community, which I've said before. And I say we go directly to each neighborhood that encompasses whatever precinct that you live in the city, and either have an elected or appointed community member that is the voice of that neighborhood, that then communicates with the precinct commander, and they dictate how they want policing done in that precinct.
Yeah, let me jump in right there. We've heard the word reimagine, and you know, for the purpose of this show, we'll run with it. One of the questions is, and maybe it's a question for both of you guys, is that how do you? I mean, because I don't think anybody's saying that policing is perfect in the city, and that's what you just talked about. Programs you're working on. We can start with you, Lexi. How do you reimagine policing in the city?
For me, I'm really big on like whole systems. So I think that instead of pulling the officer out of these things, they should be more involved. So for an example, we have a lot of really cool programs that we can utilize downtown, such as LEAD or REACH. I don't know if you've heard of them, but helps people experiencing homelessness or addiction. It's sort of a diversion program, and we as officers can divert someone that way instead of going into the criminal justice system, which I think is what we're all looking for, right? As a way to not penalize all these things, but actually find solutions that will mean that they're not, reoffending or get some help with addiction. But once we make those initial recommendations, we kind of are cut out of we don't really know what happens, So the only time we'll see somebody is if they, show up and start reoffending. So I think there could be a greater involvement of officers from start to finish in these programs. Mentoring, I think, would be great if we had people in the community that were willing to be mentors and we knew who they were. So maybe we see a kid out. I work on the 1500 block all the time down on where the shooting was at the beginning of the year. And there's kids I see out there all the time. They're not committing crime or anything, but they're just sort of amidst the trouble. But if I knew a mentor in the community that might be able to give them a little more direction, I'd love to be able to do that, or even divert if they were arrested for a low-level thing. So I think officers need to be more involved, and that's one thing that's really frustrating to me is like the more we push us away, and the more we're only valuing police as like an enforcement element, the worse our relationship with the community is going to be, because that's all we're going to be seen as, right? So if that's for me how I reimagine it, is that we are involved more in the kind of the holistic policing of the community.
Okay. Mike?
Yeah, spot on. Totally agree with what Lexi just said. And ironically enough, the decision makers that are moving this defund movement, which is not just local, but it's a national movement, it's well-funded, well-organized, we're not stakeholders to any of this conversation. And to me, that's more divisive than at a time when we need more unity. And when you remove police officers who are human beings, that we're members of this community, when you remove us, when we're the topic of discussion, I don't think we're really getting to a reasonable conversation. We can come to a middle road and understand both sides. Because I mentioned to you earlier, our voice isn't heard. That doesn't mean that we're right all the time. It just means we're humans and we have a perspective based upon our profession of law, enforcing law, but also our position on the Emerald Protection Plan is reimagining community policing right at the heart of it. And if we're removed from it, then we're going to create a bigger vast of a void of reasonableness, and we're going to go down the path, what I firmly believe we're on, is unreasonable activism that is not adhering to the reasonable majority of Seattle, which I now call the ignored majority. That our voices aren't heard. And that's a significant problem. And you saw that right outside these doors on the nights the East Precinct was in contention. That false narrative started by certain elected officials at the council that said we were the agitators. I'm going to keep on coming back to that because that's such an egregious assault to the people that I represent that divides our community more than unites us. And if we make a mistake on some of those use of force applications, I'll be the first one to own it.
I think that me personally, just as Omari, if I take my journalist hat off, I won't take this one off because my hairline isn't right. But if I was to take my journalist hat off, for me, I think they could probably go back and forth as far as, and the city should release the CCTV if they have TV. I think the issue is the proportionality of force. You know what I'm saying? And I think that that's really what drew a lot of ire in the neighborhood and everything else was the proportionality, was that many tear gas canisters, in proportion to what happened there. But I'll go back to that. I just wanted to, you were talking about being left out of the conversation. Chief Best wrote a letter to Mayor Durkin, I think it was Friday last week, when the city council first talked about the 50%, and she said that the city council has not really talked to the chief's office have they talked to Spog or anybody like that?
No, we've been completely left out. In fact, the phone calls I've put forth to the council, only one council member has talked to me directly about any of this. And they're one of the ones that don't support this defund movement.
How important, if important at all, do you think it is that feedback from the chief and feedback from union and rank and file go into this the defund discussion, the defund talks?
It's absolutely important. In fact, it's critical. And if you remove our voice from the table, how can these people that are making these decisions have all the information? And to me, that's unreasonable activism, where I go back to, they do not connect to the reasonable majority of the Seattle voter. And mind you, in November's election, only 24% voted. So that gives me further belief that there's a 76% of the Seattle populace that actually supports public safety. But more importantly, the president of the council, Lorena Gonzalez, a little over 6 weeks ago, applauded the Seattle Police Department's work towards training, de-escalation, being a lead agency, not just locally, statewide, but nationally. But now all of a sudden, the council now wants to defund us. To me, that doesn't make sense. And when you remove us from that conversation, our voice is lost. And that's why I'm on your show, and to answer these tough questions, so we can have our perspective. That's why I've almost taken every media request from me to get out there. That's one of the reasons why I ran for the position, because I saw such a void post-Ferguson of law enforcement failing to everybody's detriment, not just law enforcement detriment, but to our entire community across the nation. We didn't get our information out there, and then we let alternative forms of media, the legacy media, dictate the public safety discourse, which has led to more division, much like the false narratives we've seen with the battle of the precinct here. But to your point, I'm more than willing to have those conversations later in this conversation about proportionality and use of force, and we can delve into those more succinctly.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Having come from the private sector and being a manager of people, I kind of look at the city council and the mayor, they're our boss, right? And they have to manage all these different areas of the city. So they should have a very, very good idea of what we do on a daily basis. And even prior to this, I didn't see, I know to be fair, a lot of the council members are newer, but we haven't seen them taking that extra step of asking for ride-alongs or asking, hey, I'd like to see what you do, what resources do you use, what resources would you like to see better? It's just sort of, so it becomes an us against them, whereas we should all be working together to meet these goals. So as a rank and file officer, that's been a frustration I've had almost since I've been on the department is, if you're managing us, if you want to know what we do, if you want to to be able to address things that we're not doing well or that we're doing very well, come and see what we do, ask questions. So, I
don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but it sounds like there's a disconnect between the city council and the Seattle Police Department.
100%.
From my perspective, that is correct, yes.
All right. Got a question here. What is the Spog doing to bring the city of Seattle back into compliance with the police accountability ordinance that was part of the consent decree?
Yeah, and I think what I just talked to is the president of the council actually applauding us 6 weeks ago of our work towards the consent decree, all the reform work, the de-escalation and the training. In particular, the mayor is even on record at the same time when the city filed termination paperwork with the Department of Justice, who is the purveyor of the consent decree or settlement agreement, if you will. But what are we doing in particular? It's our membership that did the work. And people don't really understand when it came to the contract negotiation in this last round, we actually approached the accountability legislation for reopeners, and I don't know why I can't get into certain circumstances to the contract negotiations because we have to bargain in good faith. But we brought that to the table, and we actually have reopeners on the accountability legislation, and nobody really knows that. And for 30 years, we've always participated in community oversight of this department. And in fact, in the contract negotiations, I can go all the way back to the early 2000s, we've welcomed and we've supported a civilian oversight of the Office of Police Accountability, Office of Inspector General, all civilian-led. We've welcomed that. I think it would be disingenuous to be able to block that because we serve at the will of the community. However, if our voice is removed from these critical discussions, then the perspective, the context to policing, our experience of how to do the job of policing gets lost. And I think it does a disservice overall to our entire community.
Right. Question here. Why don't you want police department funds to be reallocated for the creation of community services that hire psychologists and social workers to respond to situations where the use of force would be unnecessary or counterproductive?
Yeah, so right now, since right around 2010, in fact, we started in 2008, de-escalation, that term. We actually started that whole program. We started working with mental health professionals from day one, and that's only been enhanced over the next, 10, 12 years. Now we have dedicated MHP people embedded with the department to assist us with our mental health outreach. Now, having said that, I think more succinctly to your point, we support getting out of crisis mitigation calls. Only call those, like we talked about it earlier, we support getting out of that because what it sets us up for is a failed encounter 9 times out of 10 that leads to more division, and Charlene Lyles is a great example.
Right, and one thing that we saw is in all of our conversations with people, talking to people from Decriminalize Seattle, from Creative Justice, from Defund, and talking to Chief Best, is one area where we see a lot of similar wording is around the mental health. The 17,000 calls, mental health, and that there's community organizations that might be better able to suit the mental health calls if they had more funding.
Go ahead, Lex.
I agree. I think because I do work downtown, and a lot of the calls we respond to have a mental health element to them. I think there's so many areas that could be funded better that are civilian. We have some programs that I really like, and I'd like to just say is that we have a mobile crisis team of, but they can come out, they're civilian, they can help people that don't meet the criteria of needing to be involuntarily committed or, have committed a crime. They help them get resources for the night. They're not, I would like to see them better staffed because they're helpful for us, because we can call them, we can get people diverted. We do have programs that are already working with us that are great, that I would like to see stuff like that increased. I think officers, especially as myself that work downtown, rely on those services quite a bit, and it would be nice.
So, I mean, there are some services then. I mean, when you talk to police, not only departments here, but nationally, police chiefs and sheriffs, there are some services that police officers or police departments and sheriff's officers are like, hey, this might be better served outside of our department.
Yeah, I would fully support that because I think probably the topic of discussion is crisis calls. And it's obviously that our mental health system is failing not just police officers, but our entire community, not just locally, regionally, statewide, across our nation. But the stopgap until there's a authentic, real plan that actually has change, police officers are the last call. Hey, solve this problem for us. And unfortunately, we're dealing with human beings who aren't thinking properly due to their mental health challenges. And that sometimes when you insert a police officer who's the last entity to try to get back order, to try to correct their behavior, which would be reasonable and normal to do, having said being sensitive to the mental health issues surrounding that human being, sometimes those go bad because the person on the other side has a choice. Even if that choice is clouded, we're the only entity. If we don't have the resources available, if we're the last cog in the system, sometimes those go bad, and it's unfortunate.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that whatever solution we do come up with, because obviously this is a turning point, and we are going to be coming up with solutions. That's why you're talking to us today, because we're having those conversations. But I do think police will be involved in those, because there are some places that even if the person you're dealing with is not presenting a threat, the area has just kind of random things that happen that are not safe for maybe the person that's going in there with a civilian organization. So, the police might have to come in to provide just sort of scene security, calm people down. And so I'm going back to that whole systems things, is we have to be a part of that conversation. We have to be able to work together to figure out how can we provide the best hands-off approach, if that's what it is, but also keep everybody safe. Because the moment it escalates to where somebody is feeling like they're threatened or their life is at danger, and we come in, sirens ablazing because it's a get there fast, that's going to be a different response than if we all arrive together. We can all keep it calm, and that does happen quite a bit. I don't want to take anything away from the officers that do de-escalate a lot of these calls every single day. They do a really good job, but I'd like to see us work together and not just be shunned away from the conversation.
Do you mind if I just go a little bit further on that and use Charlene Lau's example? Her death is absolutely tragic, and I think that's probably the example.
You're talking about Charlene Lau.
To the problem, exactly. Where I hope the community understands that 2 weeks prior, our people successfully were able to de-escalate that situation when she had a lethal weapon and she was holding her family hostage. We took her, remanded her into custody for her mental health evaluation. She was released. And then 2 weeks later, she calls 911 to report a burglary to her apartment. Officers get there. There is some information on the call as far as a flag of mental health, but yet they still have to go investigate that burglary call. They go there, 3 to 4 minutes of a routine conversation, but then they're immediately met with a lethal force encounter where that switch happened. And that is a classic example of suicide by cop. And it puts our people in such a bad position because now, number one, race of the officers gets pulled into this. The victim is black, and you pull in the crisis call, the complete breakdown of mental health system, failing Charlena, failing her family, failing the community. Can't we put the focus before the police respond to why the mental health system broke down for her for the years that she needed help? Why is the system focused on just the police officers who were just there to answer that burglary call, and they're put in such an unfortunate circumstance? Because I can tell you that one of the members that unfortunately had to use lethal force in that situation, they took it so profoundly that it impacted their mental health post-shooting. I mean, all these are critical. We're just human beings.
Right.
And it's just like, that's a tragedy that really needs to be talked about further.
Right. And so a few things that's the interaction with SPD is what ended her life. So of course, then this is always going to be the point that people discuss more. Secondly, with Charlene Laws, I know the generals of the case. I don't know enough about the case, but when you say that you're open for discussion and everything like that, I'd really like to be able to join up again, maybe at another show. You know what I'm saying? And you could talk about these factors. I mean, I don't feel comfortable in going back and forth about Charlene Laus because I don't have enough information, and it wouldn't be fair to the conversation. But if you're open for it, I definitely, because the community, Charlene Laus is definitely an open issue in the community.
Sure.
And it sounds like you're open to talk about it. Maybe we could set something up, you know what I'm saying?
And that's why we're here.
Exactly, and have a further discussion.
Because if we don't have those conversations without proper context and just telling our side,
right,
whether or not we're right or wrong, we have to be able to converse on this so we can get back to a reasonable discussion, because that shooting alone was used as the catalyst for Initiative 940 statewide. And if the proper context from the police perspective isn't heard relative to that, when then we're led to these initiatives sometimes that I think does us more of a disservice to just for us to be able to legally protected to do our jobs, right? But understanding that this is the community wanting this, right? And so it's a bigger conversation.
So what we'll do is we'll have Nikki put something together. We'll reach out to Charlena's people, and we'll reach back out to you guys on that. We've only got a few more minutes in this segment. We're already over, but this is, if you guys don't mind, this is important. It's a community thing. Now, when you talked about, I'm gonna jump forward and come back to my next question. Qualified immunity. This is the thing that where we hear people are on this around the protest here, and it's something they want to push now at the state level, change the qualified immunity. What's your position on that?
Well, it's more sort of a federal conversation, where I think the crux of the matter gets in, but they're already on record as far as the mayor saying they're going to go to the Olympia to try to look at arbitration for police units. Right. And so for us, arbitration is one of those things that we just cannot get rid of or surrender to. That is the last ability for police officers to have their voice in terms of discipline, putting down on the officer whether their job security is in jeopardy. And that's the job of a labor union. And people understand is that the civilian-led Office of Police Accountability, they'll get, let's say you make a complaint against Lexi, okay, about unnecessary use of force. And let's just say it's captured on video. And if it's used to not really talk what I would be a reasonable approach to that use of force, how it's analyzed, how it's broken down, well, sometimes that can lead to the chief of police, who is the ultimate the discipline maker on the type of discipline the officer should receive. They have to be able to put forth their discipline via just cause, meaning, is that discipline fair based upon the following of policy, the historical context to it, and how it's put forth on the officer. So that's why the arbitration process comes in, because if the officer approaches the union to say, listen, I believe I was unfairly disciplined here for said positions, and the entire Spog board agrees to their discipline appeal, well, then that sets the chart forward for an arbitrator who's a civilian, a neutral party to come in.
Chief, so here's the thing, and if I have the officer's name wrong, it's public record, but it's Avery. Is it Brandon Avery?
I'm not familiar with that right now.
The officer who got caught on tape, he kicked the woman in the car. He got fired. The union brought him back.
No, he didn't. You talking about Adley Shepard?
Man, it's too many.
No, I know that's fine,
show.
but yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean, but the thing is that as my understanding is that from the chief's office, they were like, yeah, man, you know what I'm saying? You're out of here. You're on the woman was handcuffed in the car. I think it shows the video shows him striking the woman. And actually that tape was a big issue because like, it seemed like the SPD was very close to getting out of the consent decree. And, you know, around the top of the year, you know, and a lot of the news that came out was the fact that he was back on the force because of the union pushing for him to get his job back.
As we should.
I'm just leading into a question here. It says, describe the process of which an officer could be investigated and fired for misconduct. And is this an internal or is this an external process? Because I mean, that's the thing when we hear Chief Best or people down at City Hall, they're like, hey, well, you know, a lot of times that the chief's hands are tied because if there is a bad officer, I mean, you know, we got bad producers, not in this room, guys, but we have bad producers. I mean, the military has, you know, there's
we're human beings
court-martialed. So I mean, of course, there's bad police officers in any profession, bad teachers, you know.
Sure.
But what they're saying is their hands are tied down at City Hall because the union, through your contract, is very powerful in negotiation where you're able to get somebody back.
I'm going to have to push back a little bit about it, and that's being very powerful. So, I mean, we could have another discussion just based upon that case alone. So understand that Adley's case is still in appeals. So I can't get into the specifics of it.
Okay.
Right now it's in the Washington State Court of Appeals. However, that use of force was done in 2014. He was fired in 2016. A civilian arbitrator determined that the just cause, which was unfair, that the chief used, then at the time Chief O'Toole to fire Adley, wasn't fair. She agreed that he violated the use of force policy at that time, but to fire him for that, they determined that was too severe of a punishment, so therefore she recommended 15 days. And so now, as a union, what are our parameters here? Did the officer, Adley, have the proper experts to assist in the investigation to give his side of the story to break down that use of force captured on video? Number one, she was handcuffed, yes. She kicked him in the face, causing him significant injuries. And then you get into the physical element as a police officer, as a human being who has to maintain control, even a female, a handcuffed suspect, who are very difficult to control and can be very violent. Adley sustained injury there. So when you, as a human, you break down the force science of this, when you have that assault, you have to mentally, instantaneously process that it's a direct assault against you, and then you have to make the decision then, how do you react to it? And it's instantaneous to stop that threat, even if they're handcuffed. And so he made the determination to use the force he did with one punch to stop her actions, regardless if she's handcuffed or not. So then what we do is this platform an arbitration which is not done in the process for the chief to determine if he violated policy or not. They don't bring in a use of force expert to question the witnesses and to really delve into the use of force caught on tape. And so is that process fair pre-done before the chief makes a decision? Where's his voice to tell his side of the story via an expert? So we brought in a use of force expert who backed Officer Shepard's decision to use that force as being reasonable and proportional based upon his training and experience and the policy at the time.
Do you think the general public saw that as reasonable and use of force?
And that's the discussion we need to have, right? Is like all these viral videos, when you break them down, there's always a side to it, and we only focus on that immediate viewing of that act. What are leading up to those viral videos before? What's the context of it? So but obviously as police professionals who are trying to obviously protect the officer's job,
right?
You know, we would support the fact that the civilian arbitrator ruled that he violated policy, therefore 15 is actual reasonable discipline to him. That's fine, we'll support that. But having him fired, we don't think that's reasonable.
Let me hop in here, and then we got to end this segment. We got another segment coming up here, and I think that me and us here we can agree that we're gonna keep this conversation going, because I mean I think there's a lot of issue, and I'm sure if we check the comments right now, there's a lot of comments. They're very reasonable about, man, well, what's up with this, what's up with this, what's up with that, and a conversation has to start somewhere. You know what I'm saying? Maybe we're having a conversation. I think that. Because me as well, you know, I'm connected. This community, Converge, you know, based in the Central District of Seattle. And I know that Trae is going to have some other questions for the other officers. But a big reoccurring theme here is like, man, what's the Spog's position on actual accountability of the officers? A lot of the general public feels like, man, you know, it's the blue line, the blue code. We look out for each other. We're going to look the other way, and everything else.
Yeah, that's not actually accurate.
But that's just a perception.
And that's why I'm here, right?
Exactly.
And
that's why I want to talk about
false.
What's your position on accountability around your officers?
Just last week, I talked to you about the discipline appeal process, that if a member feels that they've been unjustly disciplined or they've been fired, they then apply for a discipline appeal, whether it's at Spog or the Public Safety Civil Service Commission. There's two entities that a police officer can go down to try to circumvent their discipline. We just had one last week where the Discipline Appeal Board denied the officer's appeal. This has happened more often than not that people don't understand, and it's our fault for not getting our message out there.
Yeah, because we don't, you know, it's not really public when we hear a lot when the officer we just talked about is something, you got a video, you know what I'm saying? He gets kicked, he punches the suspect in custody, and, you know, gets the job back. We don't really hear about someone when their appeal is denied or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's our fault. That's why I'm here, right?
And I just like to say, from an officer's perspective, I work with so many good people, and I hope that at least some of your audience believes that. And when there is something that happens that reflects badly on us, we're the first to be so frustrated about it, because we want to have these conversations. You know, unfortunately, the things like the firings, the discipline that does get handed out doesn't get the same type of media as when it doesn't. But, you know, I hope that, you know, people watching do believe that officers are, you know, want to have the best foot forward and get really frustrated when things happen that shouldn't.
Right. And I'm sorry, Mr. Director, I did have one more thing, and I think that we'll have a different conversation with some community members who actually right here on Capitol Hill and everything else. But being out there, we talked about proportional use of force down there in the Western Barricade days. You know, is it your position, or are you guys in position to talk about, do you feel that the use of force, especially that Monday and Tuesday, that was the day that, you know, a lot of the gas came out, the pepper spray came out, the rubber bullets came out on Tuesday. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday it was contentious, but there was no release of anything. And then that Friday, Saturday, and the Sunday was the last day. But especially the first 2 days, that Monday and that Tuesday, you and I'm not talking about who started this or who did that, and we look forward to CCTV and all those kind of things, but the proportional use of force. And the reason why I ask is, like, if you go around this neighborhood right here, it's kind of a two-part question. So a lot of people went to work that day and just left their windows open and came back home and may have been tear gassed. There's people who weren't protesters who were just up there with their kids, and there's tear gas coming through the windows. You know what I'm saying? I mean, blocks away when you go over to Pike, and it blew all the way down there to Union and everything else. And so, one, do you feel that that use of non-lethal was proportional? And two, what is the Seattle Police Department, especially the East Precinct, doing here to be able to regain respect and credibility and trust of people who just live in the neighborhood? There's another guy, Robert Flagg, who was an Iraq veteran, PTSD, in 12th Avenue Arts. He talked about the CHOP, but then he also talked about the week before. He was like, man, the National Guard was out here. It was this and that and everything else. So the use of force, was it proportional, and what is the SPD doing to be able to regain, credibility and respect, and regain the relationships of people who live in the neighborhood?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll answer your last one first. Is that when we came in here to clear the CHOP, there were people applauding us, congratulating us, crying, hugging us, profusely thanking us for reclaiming this area. I got emails from business owners who were begging for us to intervene. I got people that lived in apartments close by that did this as well, and they're actually wanting us to do what we did in COVID, where we used our own money, engage the local businesses to keep them afloat on behalf of cops. They wanted us to patronize their establishments to keep them going. So that's what we're doing. I mean, we're members of this community. We wanted to get back in here at the worst way. To your point about use of force being proportional, I mean, I hope it was proportional, but we'll let the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, based upon the complaints that were received, be the purveyor, the vetting, whether or not the officers followed policy and procedure. So I'll talk about each individual use of force case once that investigation's done. But keep in mind, please, that this is not me just be punting or backing away from your question. I got to be careful of what I say because it's still being investigated, correct? Having said that, though, why isn't the onus as well put on the criminal agitators that stole the George Floyd peaceful protest message and actually were throwing projectiles at our people? I mean, we're not supposed to sit there and actually be assaulted and be okay with that. And we have the less lethal tools that have been approved by the Department of Justice in terms of crowd control at our disposal to be able to stop that criminal behavior, even if you're with a peaceful protester over here, but then you have a criminal agitator who is using that as cover to assault officers for a more political agenda. And so for us, I don't know what the answer is. I don't have that answer. We can only react to the crime occurred in front of us to protect ourselves for our working conditions. Now, if we have an egregious example of a use of force being conducted by one of the members that violates policy and violates community trust, I've always said since day one I took this presidency, I would own that immediately. And so if we have documentation that proves that one of our members did something egregious to violate community trust that's reasonable, then we have to own it. We serve at the will of the community, 100%. But I want to put the onus back on the criminal agitators that pushed a political agenda and that the council members falsely claimed that we are the agitators, which is completely false. And I get we don't want to go back to releasing video, but this is me standing up for our people, right? And dozens of injuries, separated shoulders, stitches, broken bones, IEDs, explosive devices. I mean, how is that rational?
Yeah, we got there's lots of injuries from flashbangs too. You know what I'm saying? And people getting hit with tear gas canisters, random people getting hit with rubber bullets and everything else. This is one of these things. This is the best thing is like, I think that we have time. And so we have time to continue these discussions and everything. We don't have a lot of time on this show, but it seems like you're open to continue this. And that's the most important thing is we're going to start talking about these things and these issues and everything else. But definitely want to follow back up with you about the Western Barricade.
Just to sort of conclude, you asked about how the officers here are reaching out to regain trust of the community. I don't work here, so I don't know personally, but I do know that we always...
When you're saying here, you're referencing the East Precinct, because we're right next door to the East Precinct.
I think that officers are probably at a bit of a low morale. I'm just guessing, just from everything that's gone on.
That was one of the questions as well. Like, what's the morale? Yeah.
I'm guessing because, again, I don't work here. But we always notice when we bike up, there's a distinct difference between how we're treated before we hit Capitol Hill than how, and this has been almost forever, than how we're treated once we hit Capitol Hill. So, I would invite anybody who's had concerns and wants to talk to an officer. I think a lot of people are very willing to talk, but starting it with a, getting flipped off or starting it with a FU it's not really conducive to having a conversation. And I mean, I found that when I was on the lines, if people came up and were calm and respectful and had hard questions for me, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, I mean, was a lot of questions on tape. All those hours and hours of streaming. You know what I'm saying? So
I would put it. I can't speak for the officers in the East Precinct because I don't work in the East Precinct, but I would put it on the community as well to be maybe a little softer in your approach. If you're angry, I get it, but come with a little softer approach like as this and have a conversation. And I think officers are willing to do that more than you maybe think. So.
All right, so man, we're over time by not even a little bit, but by a lot. They're giving me the evil eye over there. But I think one of the best things we have pages and pages of questions, but we definitely got through some stuff today. But I think the bigger thing is that we have a commitment to be able to keep this conversation going. You hit on some very key points that are hot topics, and especially in our community. You know what I'm saying, the Black community here. And you talked about Charlene Lyles. Be able to continue that discussion and talk about issues around accountability, and of course, man, it's still protest season, so the protest as well. You guys are welcome back here anytime. We're going to take a short break right now. When we come back, man, the story, this is a marathon session with the SPD today. We're gonna have Monique and Roselle and Treyana. You are watching the Morning Update Show.
Well, welcome back to the Morning Update Show. I'm your host, Trae Holiday. And we're going to continue this conversation with the Seattle Police Officers Guild. I have Monique and Roselle with me. Thank you guys for joining us on the Morning Update Show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. And our audience, thank you guys for staying tuned, as obviously this conversation is heavy. There's a lot that we want to get into. And so I have some community questions here that I wanted to get into with you guys. And the first one really is about morale. And, you know, you guys are dealing with a situation right now where there's clearly a line, I guess, drawn between police and maybe community, or, you know, the constituents and citizens. And I want to hear from you guys, like, how is that affecting you guys in your work, and how is it making you be reflective about how you move forward?
Well, I'll speak first on this one. Just me, I'm Roselle Ellis. I work here at the East Precinct. I've been on for 3 years. And just going around the community right now, it's kind of a eerie, weird feeling, I should say, because, you know, normally when I go about my day, we're waving to people, hi, hello, how you doing? And then right now, you know, you get some community members just with that blank stare on their face at you, and you don't know how they're feeling at the moment. And that's what I really don't want. If there's a problem, let's talk about it. You know, that's what we're here for, to get it out. But by just having a feeling and keeping it inside without voicing it, that's going to make it really tough for us to move forward. So I try to go out my way, still say hi, wave to people and stuff like that. But if the community can just come up and start engaging in conversation, I think we'll be able to get started faster. But overall morale is still, I can speak for a few officers, the ones I work with every day, we're still kind of like, we just don't know. We just don't know. And that's the whole feeling for a lot of people. We just don't know what's going on. But we want to get these conversations started. We want to get things back to some sort of normalcy and just start going on with our lives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Monique, do you have any response to that? I know it may, some folks, you know, on the chat and stuff, it may be different for female officers, and that some female officers deal with other forms of oppression and stuff. So how is it for you personally?
So for me personally, I think I am of the same mind as Omari, right? A reset person. Okay, we've gone through the turbulence, we've gone through the trials, tribulations. Where are we now? And how do we move forward? And how do we get beyond where we are right now? And so for me personally, I don't want to stay where we were. I don't want to stagnate there. I want to figure out how we're going to move forward productively. And we can't have a productive conversation. We can't have any progress if it's still adversarial. And so we have to get rid of, just completely demolish that adversarial conversation and have an open, honest discussion about what it means to be a police officer in this city, and what it means as a community member to accept and receive the services that we want to provide.
Yeah, that does make sense. And I know that Chief Carmen Best, I mean, we've been talking about it when she talks about reimagining policing, and listening to what you just said in terms of just, and both of you saying, you know, open up those opportunities to have discussion. I want to hear from you guys, what seems the most feasible in that regard with, you know, connecting back with community members? You know, does that mean we have monthly open talks? But something, what have you guys been thinking in terms of like reimagining policing?
And I think I kind of speak for Roselle too. Tell me if I'm wrong. But I feel like, especially as officers of color, that engagement has always been there. It has never left for us. And it is extremely important for our voices to be heard in those communities. The communities, I mean, I worked patrol in the East Precinct for years, and I was down in the Central District. That was my district. And so those relationships that I've created, I haven't changed. My view on how I serve hasn't changed. I still serve at the will of those people, of all people in this city, because that's my job. That's what I chose to do, and that's what I love doing. And for me, it's not gone away. It's not diminished in any way, shape, or form. But what has is the public's trust in my ability to do that. And that's the painful part. And it has to be restored collectively. We both have to work at that. And I don't know what's needed from me, And so I need somebody to tell me that, because the only thing that I can do is what I've always done. And because for me it worked, because I believe in listening. I believe in adhering to what works for the public that I serve.
And I'll add a little bit to that too. Like Monique said, being a black officer here in Seattle, Washington, that's always been part of my platform, going out every day, doing what I do, helping the community to get used to me, being able to see me in the profession that I do and as a black officer, especially in my community. So therefore, just opening up those conversations on a regular basis is what I always try to do. And so now at a time like this, when everything is so heightened, I think for me to just be out there more and let the people see me and engage in those questions and those comments, and all that dialogue would help further start the talks and breaking things down moving forward. But that's what I've always been about. I'm only 3 years on, so policing in Seattle's been changing since I've been on the board, or since I've been on the department. And seeing those changes, that's all I know is the new way that everything was starting to roll. So I'm more acceptable to sitting down, opening up, having these conversations with the community so they can tell me what they want from me, what they expect of me, because I'm all ears. It's going to just help me be a better officer when I'm getting this feedback. So I'm open, I'm inviting to it.
Well, I think that is, I'm glad that to hear you guys say that, because I think that from the community perspective, there's a huge misnomer, or maybe just an understanding or idea that, hey, you know, they don't want to know me. They just want to, you know, see me as a thug, or see me as, you know, whatever, you know, a criminal, and look at me from that perspective. And I've spoken on this platform many times about going back to the days of the beat cop, right? And just cops knowing the people that they are protecting, and the ideals around severe protection, right? Over like community, like I know that kid. When I stop that kid's car, I'm not grabbing for my gun because I know him, I know his mama, I know his grandmama. And I want to hear from you guys. I hear that out in the community a lot. Like, yeah, man, you know, what's up with the cops that knew us, you know? So if we're doing something that seems minor, there's still a discussion to be had, instead of them coming at me like I'm a criminal and ready to handcuff me, or got their hand on their gun because they're afraid and don't know me. So I want to hear from you guys that perspective, just kind of getting back to a little bit what you said, getting to know the people that you're protecting in your particular district or territory.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with that, because that's one of the reasons why I got into law enforcement, I should tell you, because it was an officer-friendly program back in the day. And just me growing up, we knew the cops. They would come when we're walking to school, good job, pass out basketball cards, football cards, and stuff like that. So I got to see them on a regular basis, and that's the officer that I want to be today. I want to know the kids in the neighborhood, because I grew up in Seattle. I know a lot of the older people now my age in Seattle that has kids in high school, middle school, and elementary. So I want their kids to know me like their mom and dad knows me, like their family members know me, instead of me being Officer Ellis. I wouldn't mind them just, hey, Roselle, how you doing? You know, because we have that relationship. And therefore that helps break down those stereotypes and those barriers, because now they have somebody to vouch for me, they seen me around, and they get to know me. And then when I put my uniform on, then if they want to call me Officer Ellis, fine. But if they still call me Roselle, that's fine with me too, because now they see me as a human instead of the police officer with the uniform I have on.
Yeah, I think that makes a huge difference in terms of building that trust back. What we're talking about, so much of this really just sits under trust. Like the trust has been broken with the number of the police killings, right? And so from you guys' perspective, I want to hear, how do you guys deal with that, right? Like, oh man, the news breaks, an officer killed another black person. You know, you guys are black officers, and I want to know, I mean, this is the human aspect we talked about, right? We talk about, that's how people get to know how you guys deal with that. When that news breaks, how does it hit you personally?
You're horrified. Excuse me, right? You're looking at, especially with the George Floyd, I literally cannot watch it, right? I have 2 adult sons. And so, and my boys grew up in Seattle. They played football here. They, played all sorts of sports. I coached. So I know and love this community. And for me to see something that horrific it's personal. I think it's personal to every person. And I don't know that it's necessarily isolated to just black people. I mean, people watch that, and it is painful to watch. And so for me, when I do put the uniform on, it's an obligation to go out and show the public that we are not all Derek Chauvin. Mm-hmm. And we respect lives. We protect lives. That is our job. That is what we are here to do. And it is absolutely against everything that I stand for personally, everything that the people that I know, Roselle included, to go out and victimize a community of people based on socioeconomic or race or anything. And so for me personally, it is important for me to go out and tell the public, I'm not that. And your life is important to me. Your family's life is important to me. What can I do to help you feel safe? What can I do to help you trust me to help you when you need help? Because the last thing I would want is for somebody to need help and not call for it because they don't trust the person coming.
That's tough.
Yeah, and like Monique was saying, just for me, I used to work at Garfield High School. And so therefore, when things went on like this in the community, I would start speaking to some of the kids at school. Then, you'll have a few of them gathered around, they're listening. And then after a while, you look around and you have more and more gathered around, and then they want to hear. Because this is what's going on today in our society. And they want to hear from a police's point of view or perspective of what went on. So therefore, I thought those conversations was really helpful because therefore we get to sit down and break things down and talk about them where they could understand, or they could have a little more clarity, or they can ask the questions that they wanted to ask at the time instead of letting it all build up. So I felt if we took the matter that's at hand right now and start talking about it, that would help to eliminate some of the bad ideas and thought process that could linger on if they didn't have anybody to give them any answers or provide a little more information on what's going on.
Well, yeah, it looks like, Omari, you have a question, yes?
I have a question, and for your audio, but I talked to an officer here the other day who was walking up, basically East Precinct, and I asked him, I said, what was it like to be looking over there? I said, did you see the person who makes your, at the barista from your coffee were there on the other side of the barricade? Or, maybe it's the person you see in the gym were there on the other side of the barricade. This officer happened to say he saw his brother on the other side of the barricade, saw him through the smoke. But for you guys at the East Precinct, one, were you part of this force that was here throughout that week on the barricade? And two, what was your experience from an officer's perspective looking out there? I mean, not so much, in the police tactical sense, but looking out there, and did you see people from the community that you recognized? What was that like? What was that about? So
basically, Omari is asking off camera. I just want to make sure we repeat it so you guys can hear it out there. What was it like if you guys were out here and saw the folks on the other side of the barricade, people that you knew, people you have relationships with? How did you guys deal with that?
I saw, excuse me, I have allergies. I saw a ton of people that I knew, that I respected, and that respected me and knew what my perspective was on service. And those people were reassuring to me, right? Because I knew that they were here for the right reasons. It was the people that I didn't know and didn't recognize, and I've been here 26 years, and I've worked a lot of protests, and there are people who are common in protest. And so it was, for me, seeing those people that I recognized and the people that I knew were out here for legitimate reasons and want legitimate change, I applaud them. I applaud them for coming out and having their voices heard. I applaud them for having a plan of action, if in fact they did have a plan of action. I respect the fact that they were willing to come and talk to us as human beings and as people and not scream and yell at us. There were people in my family who were curious. I think there was a lot of curiosity around this, and I was here for every day at various locations around because we had, 4 different barricades, and I worked all 4 of them. And seeing the true emotion, at one point I reached over and hugged. I didn't know who she was, but the pain was obvious. And I don't know what her experiences were, but she was feeling some kind of way. And it hurt me to see the pain on her face. And so I get it. I mean, we have all, it would be remiss of me to say as a black person that I have not myself been profiled, that I have not myself had a pretextual stop, performed against me, or that I don't worry about that with my sons. Mm-hmm. Of course I do. It would be disingenuous for me to say that I don't. So, yeah, I think Lexi said it. We don't want bad police officers. We don't want to work alongside someone who does not have and share the same value system that we have. And so as a person watching the protest, at points I was extremely proud of what was being said, about what was being done. The Saturday down at headquarters, Shikandi came down, and his speech was absolutely fantastic. And it was right on point. And after that, he came over, we embraced, and it was a wonderful moment, right? But then that night, when all of the peaceful protesters left, we were left with the people who were off message, who had nothing to do with the advancement of the relationship between the community and the police here in Seattle, and people of color in the police in Seattle. It was for their own personal agendas. And so I think that it's really important to make that clear separation in the two groups. And so when I saw those masses of that march in the South End, I mean, that is a beautiful thing. And it was completely peaceful. So I was very proud. I was very, very proud of the fact that we were getting messaging out, and that it was on point, and it's at a time where it needed to be said. Yeah.
I mean, I think that, you hit the nail on the head there, and just in terms of, being out there, like you said, being here for 26 years, it's not, uncommon for you to see and people that you grew up with, people that people that are in your neighborhood, maybe go to church with these people. For me, and I think what I hear a lot in the community, so much of the breakdown goes back to the trust and the fact that there was no longer opportunities to build those relationships. And so the line that got drawn in the sand just became wider and wider. We've been talking a lot about this, but I really want to hear from you guys. What do you think is needed really to bring more trust into the department and more trust into society when it comes to policing? What would you guys like to see different?
Me personally, just like you said, like footbeat cops, us being out there in the neighborhoods a little more, just in the community more, just having more dialogue with people, doing different things instead of just riding by. Maybe we get out and chat with them for a little while, just little simple stuff with like that, because like I said, that way it makes you human again. Therefore, you have conversation, you have dialogue, and then maybe you pass by somebody on Monday, but then Wednesday they've seen you Monday and Tuesday, then Wednesday they might want to speak to you, something like that. So just being around, engaging with the public more, and doing activities like that where the public is involved with the police department, not just passing by each other like two ships in the night. As long as I can see you, acknowledge you, and have some sort of just quick dialogue, sometimes that's all it takes.
Yeah.
And teaching the public, we have a community where the community can go through like training, right? Teaching them why we do what we do, so that it's not so mysterious, and that it doesn't come off as excessive or overly authoritative, so that they know, oh, this is why they're doing that. I think there's a cloud of mystery around why we do what we do at times, and it looks really militaristic or it looks really violent. And I think that people can better understand and appreciate if they know what either preceded whatever is happening or why we're doing it. Just the why, I think, is important as well.
Yeah, and just more education, really. And that helps to kind of dissuade some of the ideas that maybe you go into your own understanding, then you have something else to base it off of. Obviously with talks of defund SPD, so much of that has been about, well, it's not just about defunding just to defund. It's also about reinvesting in other services that will bring some of that stress off of the police department in terms of all of the multitude of calls that you guys have to respond to. And so I want to hear from you guys, because a lot of what's being said in community is that, look, there's community groups that can do this a little bit better. If we work in tandem with policing, we can have a better system in terms of bringing some more mental health and social services support to some of those calls that are now being held on you guys, and just stretching the police force out very thinly. I want to hear from you guys' perspective. Do you agree with that in terms of, yeah, we're stretched thin, we're getting calls for everything, and yes, we would like to work with community? Because I think maybe, to clear up any confusion around, like, that's not what we want at all. We got this and we know what's best. I want to hear from you guys.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Like you said, a lot of our calls are crisis-related calls and things like that. And I think that goes back to being tied in with the community, because now, therefore, you might know that individual who's in crisis. You might know him on a first-name basis, get to know him. He could be somebody's brother, sister, aunt, uncle, cousin, somebody's related to. And therefore, if we have that relationship with them, therefore, it could help bring down the tensions right then and there on that call alone. But I totally agree, us working with more social workers and more healthcare professionals and things like that will help our job be a lot easier, as well as their job too. But I just very much think that we need to all come together as a collective group of the community and work together, and not be so divisive, you go your way, I go my way. If we come together and we really want to make change and solve something, let's all just sit down and work together.
If I could piggyback on that, I think it's important for people to understand as well, just like Lexi was saying, that we have never rejected the people who are trained to do those jobs, right? The crisis calls that we get, we are clearly, we have 40 hours, I have 40 hours plus the 9 hours of training that we have every year of crisis intervention training. Of course, I would welcome a social worker. However, we have to make sure that that social worker is safe going into those scenes, because people who are in crisis are unpredictable. They, sometimes present very calmly, but then in a split second it changes. And so that changes that entire interaction. And so sometimes we have to intervene and take the social worker out of it just to make it safe for the social worker. Not that we want to harm that person. And even for fire calls, I don't know that people don't understand that the fire department will not go into a shooting scene to administer aid without us first making that scene safe. And it's only fair to them that we do that. They're not armed. They're not prepared to deal with the potential violence that could occur at those scenes.
Well, before we get out of here, I know it's been a really long show, and I just thank you guys for giving us your time. But before we get out of here, one of the last things that I really wanted to ask you guys was about community policing. Again, kind of a lot of the SPD, defund SPD discussions have been around. What we really need to do is invest more in community approaches and approaches that are actually rooted in culturally responsive methods. And I wanted to hear from you guys. It sounds like, at least you two, from this conversation, you guys are like, yes, we want to work more with community. We want to be engaged. We want to have that relationship again. And so there's a lot of statistics that show community policing really does work in tandem and allows you guys to deal with the more crazy cases or death and things like that. But when it comes to like a domestic dispute or a peer dispute, two young kids fighting, those kinds of things, bringing in restorative justice practices like what's, evidenced at Wall Block and what they were doing at Rainier Beach. I think there's a lot of great data. Even the Federal Way Youth Action Team out in South King County has done some self-policing and just like having a community response team that goes out to these kinds of incidents. And I just want to hear from you guys before we get out of here. Does that seem viable to you in terms of one of the ways to bridge and build those gaps that you guys are now, again, being stretched thin, and just your perspective on community policing?
So when I used to be a part of the East Precinct Community Police Team, in the Central District, and it was amazing. I mean, I loved it, and I knew everybody in my, like literally everybody in my district. And so we would meet on Thursdays at the senior center. They had my phone number. They would call if there was a problem. I personally would go out and address that issue if the house had issues. And a lot of good things came from that. I mean, a lot of good things came from that. And I firmly believe in restorative justice. I believe that there are a lot of alternatives to incarceration, and I don't think that a kid fighting another kid necessarily needs that one of those kids need to go to jail, right? And so, yes, I don't know that there would be anybody who would disagree that we could do a lot better with community policing, but I want to also applaud some of the things that we've already done, and I hope that those efforts don't get pushed out and we try to reinvent the wheel, because that was a really good system that we had before.
So really, it sounds like you're just like, let's bring back a great system.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us right here on the Morning Update Show. We know that a lot of our viewers have been wanting to hear from you guys, and so I just appreciate you guys giving us your time. Stay tuned, everybody. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back to the Morning Update Show. I'm your host, Trae Holiday, and this has been a great, long show today. Amazing show, though, Omari. I can't say it enough. I mean, what a great discussion we were able to have with Spog today.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is this, and when you read the comments, and there's a lot of them, when you read the comments, man, it tells you that one thing that I think that the police have acknowledged and the community has definitely acknowledged is there is a communication gap between the police and the community. And, you know, if we can play our part and then starting to bridge that gap, and talking to the Spog, it sounds like it's a gap even between the city council and the police and everything. You know, I published a blog the other day that said without communication, there can be no reimagination. And I think that's very much the case that we find here in our Emerald City. Almost all stakeholders agree that we're at this precipice here where very well Seattle and the way Seattle operates might not very well be the same in the future. We just don't know exactly what it's going to look like. But by all parties here, I don't think anybody is satisfied with the status quo, and change is definitely on the horizon. I think one of the good things that came out of this conversation here today with Spog is the agree to be able to disagree. You know what I'm saying? But two, most importantly, is to continue the discussion. I know in our community, there's quite a few things people want to talk to the police about. You know what I'm saying? Michael Solon brought up Charlene Laus, but man, we've got it. We also have a lot of unsolved murders. You know, and we talk about here with Lorenzo Anderson, Antonio Mays Jr. right here in the CHOP. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, when you talk about Connor Dassa Holland, you know, out there at Rainier Beach, and so many more on and on and on. In Seattle, I know we're talking about Seattle police, but then, you know, also out in King County, you know,
yes.
There's so many unsolved murders that are out there.
My boy Tyrone Love. I'm sorry, I just had to throw his name in there.
Exactly.
Yes.
All the way back to Tyrone Love. Our community has experienced, you know, so many unsolved homicides, and it'd be very good to be able to talk to the police, you know, about that as well. But we want to be able to keep the conversation going.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the best things that we can do here at Converge, is be able to provide a platform for the police to come and be able to ask questions. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, clearly there was way more questions than time.
Yeah.
So we're gonna set up some more sessions here with the Spog.
And I loved what, in that last segment, just going back to some of the things that used to work. There was a community policing roundtable. There was certain infrastructure in place that actually bridged the gap. And so maybe bringing some of those things back into the police force. And it sounded like, too, that in terms of where a lot of the community members are coming from, wanting to do community policing, these guys also agree that there is a need for that and that there's a way to start bridging those gaps. So I'm glad that we can begin to have these discussions.
And, relationships in the Central District and with the police, I've seen them change, over time. Man, we filed a claim against the police. I was 16 years old. You know what I'm saying? Right here, the East Precinct, George Sector. You know what I'm saying? We got beat up. But, I've seen policing, evolve over time in the Central District. But also what I've seen as well is that what I think the Seattle Police Department and City Council need to also have a different approach when you talk about community police, because when I was a child, the Central District was 70-80% black, and there was a big community to be able to not only work with the police but also for accountability around policing. And when you talk about, if you go back 2 decades, things like that, what Officer Monique was talking about, is that, you saw all those people there, and even the stores that you went to 2 decades ago, that was Jordan's drugstore. You know what I'm saying? That was the Littles who had the mini mart there. You know what I'm saying? You're talking about Miss Helen's, and all those places of community were there in the Central District, and those places of gathering where police and community and different people can gather. Through gentrification, the numbers are very different now in Seattle, and that means that the approach very well might be different, because before, if there was an issue in the CD, Mama and probably Big Mama and them live right there in the CD in the Valley or something like that. Right now, I think what we're facing is we have issues that are in the CD, but the people live over here in the South End, but they might hang out in West Seattle. So Seattle Police Department, when you talk about community policing, they might have to reimagine the community being a bigger geographic footprint than just being able to go over something happened on Jackson and being able to go and talk to the family on Madison.
I agree. And this is why, response teams that are also like, maybe there's a mix. Maybe there's a couple police and some community members, but at the end of the day, it's these community response teams. And I think what we heard too is that so much of it is about relationship building. Once again, that's what brings the trust back. It's really understanding and knowing who you are policing that helps to bridge that gap as well.
Right. And like I said, we're going to get out of here, but we talk to a lot of people. You guys know me. I talk to everybody. You know what I'm saying? I just feel like the average person might kind of be like me and have a lot of questions, so irregardless, I like to just ask a lot of questions, and I would repeat this, and I would challenge our viewers, no matter where you're at on these issues, is that, man, we don't have to agree, but let's make a commitment to understand. And I can promise you this, though, this conversation with the Seattle Police Department, this conversation with the Police Guild will continue. We're going to put something on the books, you know what I'm saying? So the issues and comments we didn't get to today, we're going to continue that. But you know what time it is?
Oh, yeah, man. We got to do it.
Take a stand. And so a programming note, 6 o'clock tonight, we got community voices at the Art of the Matter. This art has been a big deal here in the CHOP. And we said early on that it was going to be a sensitive issue here around the art, and it has been. So tonight at 6 o'clock, we're going to be live with community voices at the Art of the Matter, and then we're back again tomorrow at 11 a.m. for the morning update show.
Amazing. I'll be back tomorrow.
All right. Catch you guys then. Peace.
Peace.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun.